The Earth Mirror. Long ago, in the low mountain range of the Odenwald, there lived a young sorcerer named Schunikel. He was curious, intelligent, and restless, for in his heart burned the desire to find the lost treasures that had been buried deep in the Odenwald's earth during the 30 Years' War. Many people in the region had fallen into poverty and despair as a result of that dreadful war, and they too searched desperately for these treasures, Schunikel among them. Day and night he studied ancient books, rune-covered scrolls, and mysterious symbols, until one day he was able to create a tool that would guide him to the hidden riches. Thus, he forged the Earth Mirror, a round paper disc filled with magical symbols, covered by a piece of window glass. Then Schunikel took a handful of earth, placed it in a round vessel, and laid the Earth Mirror over it. He felt at once that his work had succeeded. The Earth Mirror was made, but its power still slumbered in silence. In old writings, Schunikel had read that the mirror would reveal its hidden strength only if held above the face of the dead. And so, one night, he set out to a small chapel on the edge of a village. There, in the cold stillness of the morning hall, lay a deceased man, soon to be buried by the villagers. The candles flickered weakly as Schunikel approached. With trembling hands, he lifted the Earth Mirror and held it over the dead man's face. At once, a light began to glow within the vessel, like a tiny sun. On the smooth surface, shadowy images appeared: forests, hills, a certain tree, and beneath it the gleam of treasure hidden deep underground. Schunikel recognized the place. His heart pounded, for he knew the magic had spoken. The way to one of the buried treasures had been revealed to him. That very night, Schunikel set out. In his hand he carried the shimmering Earth Mirror, which guided him like a shining star. The closer he came to the place he had seen, the brighter the glass shone, until at last, in the middle of a small clearing, it began to pulse with light. Here, Schunikel knew, the treasure was hidden. He set the mirror aside, raised both hands, and murmured ancient incantations. At once before his eyes, a magical shovel appeared and began digging into the earth all by itself, exactly where the treasure was buried. Schunikel watched as the ground opened up deeper and deeper. The scent of damp soil filled the air, and even the night seemed to hold its breath. Near midnight, the magical shovel struck something hard. A dull sound echoed through the forest. Schunikel stepped closer, whispered a word of power, and from the depths rose a heavy cauldron brimming with glittering gold. His heart pounded with awe and joy. He had found the treasure he had so long desired. Satisfied, Schunikel used his powers to lift the shovel once more into the air, spoke a few words of magic, and the tool dissolved into nothingness. At that very moment, a branch cracked behind him. Before he could turn, 3 figures leapt from the darkness. It was a band of robbers, rough men with sneering faces who had followed him through the shadows. "There he is, the gold finder," one of them jeered. They seized Schunikel, tore the cloak from his shoulders, and searched his pockets for valuables. The glowing Earth Mirror they threw aside carelessly, seeing in it nothing but a piece of glass. Schunikel was shocked and tried to lift his hands to cast a spell, but his arms were already bound. And to conjure, he needed free hands. The robbers laughed cruelly, mocked him, and claimed the cauldron of gold for themselves. One pulled out a rope and said coldly, "We'll take your treasure, and you'll get a tree from us as a gift." Schunikel's heart tightened as they looped the noose around his neck. Still laughing, the robbers dragged Schunikel to a nearby tree. The young sorcerer begged once more for mercy, but they only laughed again. Moments later, they hanged him. The rope tightened around his throat, choking off his breath. For a moment, Schunikel struggled and kicked, then consciousness faded, and death drew near. While he hung lifeless from the tree, the robbers prepared to flee with the cauldron of gold. But while this dreadful deed took place in the Odenwald, something stirred in the dark far away. Deep below the ruins of an old castle in the Spessart Mountains lived a small gray creature known as the Field Desecrator. In the darkness of his cellar, the little man sat before a table on which stood a cauldron full of gold he had once stolen. He counted the coins endlessly, again and again. His greed would never rest. Yet that night, he paused. A shiver ran through him. Something had touched the earth. A spell had been cast, powerful and ancient. The field desecrator sensed that a treasure had been raised from the soil by magic, and he also knew where it had happened. His eyes gleamed with malice and greed as he hissed through gritted teeth, "Gold, brought forth by sorcery, belongs not to mortals, but to me alone." And so he resolved to claim the treasure for himself. The field desecrator was not alone in his dark lair. 3 spirits were bound to his will, obeying his every command. Each day at noon, he struck his gold-filled cauldron 11 times. With every strike, a deep rumble echoed through the cellar, until at last 3 shadowy figures appeared before him. These phantom servants roamed across the human fields, where they blighted the crops, made the stalks wither, drove away livestock, and filled the farmers with terror. When their wicked work was done, they returned to their master and recounted their misdeeds. Then the field desecrator laughed with dreadful glee, his evil eyes gleaming in the dark. The more suffering they caused, the stronger he became, for he fed upon human fear and despair. But now, at midnight, the field desecrator struck his cauldron 11 times again. From the cellar's shadows, the 3 spirits rose once more, but they were no longer black phantoms. At night, their forms were different. Now they blazed with fire, their bodies made of flame, and in their heads glowed 2 eyes like molten metal. The field desecrator raised his hands and thundered, "Hear me, my servants of fire! In the distant Odenwald, one has used magic to draw gold from the earth. It is not his, it is mine. Let us go and seize it." The spirits bowed in burning reverence, and so the forces of evil set out to claim the treasure. The field desecrator fetched a large round bowl from his cellar, a vessel he had long possessed, and which, too, held ancient magic. One needed only to name a destination, and it would carry its rider there, as if guided by unseen hands, with incredible speed. With a shrill laugh, the gray man leapt into the bowl and spoke the name of his destination. At once, the vessel began to tremble, then shot forth as if caught by a storm. Through narrow gorges and over mossy slopes it raced, across roots and stones, through trees and bushes without touching them. Behind him flew the 3 fiery spirits, casting an eerie glow across the forest. The animals fled in panic, sensing the wickedness of these beings. Within moments, the field desecrator reached the clearing in the Odenwald where the earth mirror had shone and the treasure had been unearthed. His vessel scraped along the forest floor and came to a halt. No sooner had he arrived than he saw the 3 robbers struggling to carry away the heavy cauldron of gold. The field desecrator stood atop a rise and cried out in a dreadful voice, "You fools! The treasure is not yours. It is mine alone." The robbers recoiled in fear, but he raised his hand and pointed. Instantly, the 3 fire spirits rushed toward them. Panic seized the men. They dropped the cauldron and ran for their lives, but the spirits were faster. With a hissing roar, they enveloped the robbers in flaming arms. Their screams echoed through the Odenwald as the fire consumed them, leaving behind nothing but ashes, and the gold glowed quietly in the night. The field desecrator laughed, believing the treasure now his. As he approached the gold, he noticed at the edge of the path the young sorcerer Schunikel hanging limp from the tree, unconscious, nearly dead, his head bowed. A cruel grin twisted the gray man's face. "Another one yet hanging," he hissed. "Let him burn, for my amusement." With a flick of his hand, he commanded the fire spirits. At once their flames leapt toward the tree, and in a heartbeat, Schunikel's body was engulfed in fire. The field desecrator laughed as the forest flared with light, but then something happened that he had not foreseen. Within the flames, Schunikel opened his eyes. The fire that tormented and threatened to consume him was, for a sorcerer, also a source of power, a life force that gave him breath even with the rope around his neck. The same flames that burned him also burned through the rope and his bonds. Schunikel fell to the ground, still burning, but alive. Gasping and in pain, he lifted his head, and in his eyes burned the same fire that had saved him. The field desecrator recoiled, staring in disbelief at the young sorcerer who moments before had hung lifeless. The fire that should have destroyed him now surrounded him like a radiant aura of power. Before the gray creature could comprehend, Schunikel raised his arms. With a mighty cry, he summoned the earth mirror, and the round disk that had lain forgotten in the grass flew through the air into his hands, as if drawn by invisible force. He lifted it high above his head and spoke words of power that seemed to come from another world. The mirror began to shine, first softly, then brighter and brighter, until a blinding light burst forth, as though a second sun had risen. A terrible scream rang out. The field desecrator covered his eyes, and his fire spirits shrieked in agony, retreating. The radiant magic was unbearable to dark beings like them. Screeching, they fled, the field desecrator riding away on his enchanted bowl, his 3 fire spirits trailing behind him. When the brilliant light of the earth mirror faded and the shadows of the field desecrator vanished into the distance, the young sorcerer sank to the ground in exhaustion. His body was burned, but by his healing magic he could mend some of his wounds. He leaned against the trunk of an old tree and gazed silently at the cauldron of gold, still glimmering faintly. Where once he would have felt triumph, he now felt only heaviness. That night he had seen the depths to which greed could drive men, to become thieves, murderers, and demons. Quietly he swore never to follow that same path. Wealth, he whispered, is worth nothing if it corrupts the heart. So he took only a small part of the gold. The rest, once he had regained his strength, he brought to a monastery in the town of Miltenberg in Bavaria and gave it to the monks, who used it to help the poor and the sick. Schunikel kept the earth mirror and stored it in his chamber of magic, hidden from all eyes. Since that night, when the light of the earth mirror drove the darkness from the forest, the field desecrator was never seen again in the woods, nor did his 3 fire spirits, who had once brought terror to fields and villages, ever return. The people of the Spessart said he had lost his power. Others believed he dared not emerge again, fearing the light that had once blinded him. Many years later, another treasure hunter found the ruins of the castle in the Spessart. Drawn by the tales and the lure of gold, he descended bravely into the dark cellar. There, upon a table, he saw indeed a cauldron full of gold, gleaming mysteriously, even in the darkness. But then, from the shadows, came a terrible laugh, echoing through the vaults, followed by hoarse curses and maledictions. The man fled in terror and never returned. Though he had longed for the gold, his life was dearer to him. That was the last known encounter with the field desecrator. Yet the people of the region say that even today, deep within the cellar, one can still hear his wicked laughter, accompanied by the clinking of the cauldron filled with gold.